So again, this is one of the open-ended questions that you have to know. Please write down everything on your graph paper, okay? And it says over here, prove the triangle midsegment theorem. And you know, when you just look at triangle midsegment theorem, you're like, what the heck are you talking about, right? Miss Choi, you never taught me the triangle midsegment theorem. And that's the whole point. I never taught it to you, so this is a good time for you to prove it, right? Using what? Using the figures that's shown here. And they give you more information. And the more information they give you is MN is a midsegment of triangle ABC. So can somebody tell me, what does midsegment mean? The middle of what? Yeah, the segment is right smack in the middle of the triangle, okay? This is the line or segment. That's wrong, not a line. This is a segment in the middle, okay? This is a segment in the middle of the triangle. So that's very important information because now you know that this line over here is right smack in the middle of this whole triangle. And that gives me a lot of information, okay? So let's first think about that before I even continue to read the other part of the question, okay? Because this is a midsegment. I just noticed that I don't have any coordinates for point M and point N. Okay, this is a big problem because I cannot prove anything back here if I don't know what numbers or letters they are, right? But what I do have is, I have point A over here and I have point B over there, okay? Now, the question over here said, this line, this segment here is a midsegment. That tells me that this point is where? Right smack in the middle of these 2 points, right? And then what about this point here? This point is going to be right smack in the middle of this one and that one. You see that? Okay, so that gives me some hint. Now, on the test, your question is only going to be up to here. I'm not going to give you all this stuff, okay? It's because this is the textbook and they want to give you some direction. That's why they give you all this information because textbooks are really nice, okay? So, what we have to do, this is the first step. Using the midpoint formula, you got to find the coordinates of M and N, okay? M and N. So let's go ahead and do that. So then you're like, Miss Choi, what's the midpoint formula? Well, lucky you because I'm going to tell you, right? Midpoint formula is very simple. All you have to do is add the two x's and then divide by 2. So x sub 1 plus x sub 2 divided by 2. What that means is you're going to find the x value for group 1 and x value for group 2, and then you're going to divide by 2. Then you're going to do y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. And that's it, okay? So now let's go ahead and plug it in to find point M, okay? So I want to find point M, and it's right smack in between A and B. So I'm going to say this is my group number 1 and this is my group number 2, okay? So the x value in group 1 is 2q plus the x value in group 2 is 0. And I'm going to divide that by 2. And that's going to be my x value for point M. To find my y value for point M, the y value in the first group is 2r, right? Plus, and the y value in the second group is 0 over 2. So now what we're going to do is, what is 2q plus 0, guys? 2q. Like when you add 0 to anything, it's the same, right? What is 2q divided by 2? Divided by 2. 1q or just q, right? So there you go, q comma. What is 2r plus 0? 2r. What is 2r divided by 2? R. 1r is the same as r. So look, we got our point M. And what is our coordinates for point M? Q, comma, R. Okay? So the answer for the coordinates for M over here is going to be Q, comma, R. Okay? Now let's go ahead and find the coordinates for N. Okay, I'm gonna erase everything. Are we done? Okay. Ernesto. So then now let's move on, right? I want to find the coordinates for n over here. So n, okay? And we have to use the same formula, right? So the x in group number 1 is 2q plus the x in group number 2 is 2p. And you have to divide that by 2, right? Because it's right smack in the middle. And then now let's do the y sections. The y from group 1 is 2r plus the y from group 2 is 0 over 2. So let's calculate. This one is going to be a little bit difficult, but let me show you how to do it. You first have to draw a heart with this side and that side. And then you got to start with the left side. What is 2q divided by 2, guys?
Q.
Just q, yes. 1q or q?
Q.
And then now we're going to do the right side of the heart. What is 2p divided by 2?
P.
Yes, p. Alright, so we're done with this side. Over here is easy. 2r plus 0 is 2r. Divided by 2 is? R. So that would be my coordinate for n. Q plus p comma r. That's this one right here. We are now done with our first step. Our first step was to find these 2 points so we can do something. Prove the other parts. Okay? Alright, so let's continue on, right? We are done with step number 1. So I'm going to erase all this stuff because we don't need it anymore, right? Okay. So now we have to continue reading the question. Yeah, we didn't even finish reading it, right? It says complete the explanation to prove that MN is parallel to BC. So then this is the part where I have to explain to you. You see these 2 lines that are straight standing next to each other? That means parallel. So MN and BC are parallel to each other. We got to prove that. That's one thing we got to do. And then the next thing we have to do is prove that MN is, the length of MN is half of BC. Okay? So then, in order for you to do this, can you tell me, what kind of formula do you think you have to use? Huh? No, not that. We have to use the distance formula, okay? So that way we can figure out how long BC is, how long MN is, and then we can see if BC is really only half of MN. Okay? Now, when these 2 are parallel to each other, what do we have to look for? 2 parallel lines have what? They have the same slope. So we are looking for 2 things. Number 1, to make sure that these 2 are parallel to each other, we got to make sure that the same slope is the same. In order for us to make sure that the length of BC is length of MN is half of BC, we got to use the distance formula so we can figure out how long they are. Okay? So let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is right here. They started with the slope formula to prove that the 2 segments are parallel to each other. Okay, Rosario? So then, this is where you need to know the formula for the slope. And we already did this. We recorded ourselves. Slope is rise over run. But that is like an elementary school way of memorizing it, right? When you don't have real numbers, what are we supposed to do, right? So what we're going to do is, I'm going to give you the real formula, okay? The slope is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. And it's the same thing, but instead of using numbers and counting how many we go up and to the right, going up is on the y-axis, right? So whatever the second number is, you have to subtract the first number from that, and that would be the length of the height. And then we have to measure how many you got to go to the right. So whatever the second number is, and then you subtract it by the first number, and you'll get the length of how many you have to go to the right. Okay? So let's go ahead and use this formula. Okay? So then now, let's go ahead and find the slope of MN. And hey, we could totally find the slope of mn because we know what the coordinates are. This is q comma r, and then n is q plus p comma r. We got that over here during our first step, right? So now let's plug in the numbers. It shouldn't be that hard, right? So that is, we have to have group number 2 and group number 1, right? So same thing, let's go ahead and designate groups, okay? So I'm going to erase this because we're not using those. We're using this one and this one, okay? So you know what? I'm going to call this group number 2 and I'm going to call this group number 1. And it doesn't matter how you put them, okay? You're going to get the same answer. So the y value from group number 2 is r minus the y value from group number 1 is another r. And then I have to divide it by the x value from group 2 is q plus p, right? Minus the x value from group number 1 is q. So there you go. R minus r is 0. And guess what? 0 divided by whatever number is at the bottom is always going to be 0. Kind of like 0 times any number is always 0, right? Same thing, 0 divided by any number is always 0. So we know that the slope of mn is 0. And then using this information, I want you to try and find the slope of BC on your own, which is this one right here. So this time, I'm going to erase this because you don't need that anymore. And you're going to use these two numbers, right? These two coordinates, right? And then you can say this is group 1 and this is group 2. Okay? And I want you to go ahead and plug the numbers in, but you'll find out that the slope of BC is also 0. That proves that the slope is the same, which means that the two segments are parallel to each other. Since the slopes are the same, MN is parallel to BC. Okay? Now we're almost done. We just have one more step, which is going to take really long, right? So now, let's try and put in all the answers that we have so far. M was Q comma R, and N was P plus Q comma R. Okay, thank you. And the slope was 0, and the slope here was 0 as well. Since the slopes are the same, that is parallel, right? So that's what we have so far. Now let's go ahead and move on to the third part, okay? All right. So there you go. We have step number 3. And we already talked about how we need to use the distance formula to prove that the length of this is really only half of that, okay? And to do that, we have to use the distance formula, okay? So there you go. D equals the square root of, very, very big square root of, x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. Right? Okay, so same thing. We have to use groups, okay? And right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just find the length of MN. Okay? So let me erase this because we're not using that, right? And I'm going to write my coordinates. This one was Q comma R. And this one was Q plus P comma R. Okay? And I'm going to say that this group is number 1 and this group is number 2. Okay? So, now let's work. D is equal to the big square root of. X sub 2 means the x value in group 2. The x value in group 2 is Q plus P minus x sub 1 means the x value in group 1, okay, which is Q squared plus y sub 2 means the y value in group number 2, R, minus y sub 1 means y value in group number 1. And then you square it. Okay, let's do this. Big square root. Q minus Q is 0, so I'm left with P. So what is P squared? P squared. R minus R is 0, and 0 squared is 0. So then now we're going to add these together, and we have P squared, right? So there you go. D is equal to the square root of P squared. But we talked about this, guys. The square root undoes the square, right? So what is D equal to? P. So the length of MN is P. Now I want you to go ahead and calculate the distance, okay, of segment BC. In order for you to do that, I'm going to erase this part because you don't need that. You're going to need this line over here, right? And these coordinates. And I'm going to say that this is group number 1 and this is group number 2. So when you do the same thing that I showed you here, you'll find out that the distance for BC is 2P. So that proves that the length of MN is only half of BC, right? Because P is half of 2P. So MN is 1/2 of PC, or equal to. Okay? And we are done.